Every kid has one thing in common. They love stories about being different or special. Just think of movies like Harry Potter, Spider-Man, or shows like Ben 10. It's a storytelling formula that never fails, because it reminds us that we can find our place in the world, even when everyone looks at us like we don't belong. And when we talk about those kinds of stories, few left such a lasting mark on a generation as X-Men, mutants who serve as the perfect metaphor for anyone who's ever felt rejected or misunderstood. A true classic, so successful and inspired countless other works. That brings us to the show we're revisiting today, X-Men Evolution. Basically, it's a teenage version of the X-Men, set in high school. But it's not just that. This show has soul. It's full of heart, whether in the characters, the conflicts, the friendships, or even the soundtrack. If I had to sum up its message in one sentence, it would be, we're all different in some way, and that's not a flaw. It's our greatest strength. The series managed to take all the complexity of the comics and turn it into a coming-of-age story about growing up different in a world that judges you. Wolverine becoming a teacher, Rogue dealing with the pain of never being able to touch anyone, Cyclops struggling to be the perfect leader. It was teenage life with superpowers, and it worked perfectly. So today on the channel, X-Men Evolution, one of the best animated series ever made about our favorite mutants. We open on a Bayville High football game. The crowd is going wild. The home team's quarterback, Duncan Matthews, scores a touchdown, and a redheaded girl, Jean Grey, snaps a photo of him. Meanwhile, in the bleachers, Scott Summers is hanging out with a friend, casually flipping a coin. But it's not all fun and games. A kid named Todd Talansky, aka Toad, is picking pockets in the crowd. Duncan and his jock friends notice and ask their coach for a moment to handle the situation. Jean sees this and senses trouble. Scott also spots Toad's sticky fingers and decides to investigate. He finds Duncan and his gang about to rough up Toad against a wall. Playing the hero, Scott steps in saying that 3-on-1 is cowardly.
What do you care about this scuzzo, Summers? Not much. But I'm not crazy about 3 against 1 either.
Duncan doesn't appreciate the attitude and tells him to get lost with his sunglasses at night. Things escalate. Scott shoves Duncan, who falls into the mud. Furious, the quarterback lunges at him. Jean yells Scott's name, distracting him just long enough to take a punch to the face. His glasses fly off, and that's when all hell breaks loose. A red laser beam shoots from Scott's eyes, hitting Duncan dead on and blowing up a nearby gas tank. The football field turns into an action movie set. Jean finds Scott, hands him his glasses, and tells him to run. Duncan is left with a concussion and no memory of the event. Amid the chaos, a man named Charles Xavier uses his mental powers to erase the memory of a suspicious police officer. Elsewhere, Logan sees the news of the explosion in the paper and decides it's time to head home. From a distance, Saber-tooth watches everything. The next day, at the Xavier Institute, Scott and Jean meet the new student, Kurt Wagner, a blue-skinned guy with a tail. Xavier scolds Scott for his slip-up the night before and introduces Kurt's power. He can teleport. At school, the principal, Raven Darkholme, who is actually Mystique, orders Toad to investigate Scott. Later, Toad tries to provoke Scott by stealing his glasses, but gets nothing out of him. Xavier detects Toad with Cerebro and sends Storm to give him a little test. Toad breaks into the mansion and gets pummeled by wind and lightning, but manages to get inside, where he comes face to face with Nightcrawler. Their fight spills into the danger room, and Cyclops and Jane have to save their skins. Terrified, Toad flees, bumping into Wolverine, who has just arrived. In the end, Cyclops convinces Nightcrawler to stay, and Mystique gets chewed out by a mysterious voice for her failure with Toad. One night, a girl named Kitty Pryde dreams she's falling and wakes up in her basement. How? She phased right through her bed and the floor. Her parents are panicking, and at the X-Mansion, Cerebro detects the new mutant. The next day, Kurt is late for school again due to his fast food addiction. Meanwhile, Kitty, though scared, decides to go to class. Professor X and Jean try to talk to her parents, but her father slams the door in their faces. Plan B is to approach Kitty at school. Meanwhile,
Saber-tooth.
A curious Scott and Kurt decide to follow Wolverine. At school, Kitty's life isn't easy. Two mean girls lock her in a locker. Desperate, she ends up phasing through the door and comes face to face with Lance Alvers, a boy who is spray painting the lockers. He introduces himself and shows her that he's special too by causing a mini earthquake. Kitty gets scared and runs off. Later, Lance uses his powers to get revenge on the bullies who were picking on Kitty. Jean finds Kitty in the auditorium where she's trying to understand her phasing powers. Jean tries to connect with her, revealing her own telekinetic and telepathic abilities, but Kitty freaks out and runs away. Lance shows up and threatens Jean, telling her to stay away from the girl. The fight between Wolverine and Saber-tooth erupts in a parking lot. Cars go flying everywhere. Cyclops and Nightcrawler show up to help, but Wolverine is pissed that they're interfering in his personal grudge match. Lance convinces Kitty to use her powers to break into the principal's office and steal the answers to a test. But just as she realizes she's been used, Jean and her parents appear. Lance loses control, toppling a bookshelf onto Kitty's father and trying to drag her away, causing the whole school to shake. Jean reminds her that she doesn't have to be a freak. Kitty chooses her family, and Jean, with Xavier's help, uses her powers to save them from the falling debris. Kitty finally accepts the X-Men's help. In the end, a lone Lance is approached by Mystique. She recruits him for her team and christens him Avalanche. We're at a school dance in Mississippi. A boy named Cody works up the courage to ask a goth girl, Rogue, to dance. He stumbles, and the moment he touches her to help her up, he collapses. Rogue, in a panic, absorbs his memories and strength and flees, not understanding what happened. Her foster mother, Irene, senses everything from a distance and knows Xavier's team is on its way. At the X-Mansion, Wolverine is training in the danger room. Xavier assembles the team to find the new mutant. On the jet, it has a field trip vibe. Shadowcat thinks Cyclops is cute, and Nightcrawler, awkwardly trying to impress her, ends up falling on top of her. Meanwhile, Mystique meets with Irene. Their plan is to get to Rogue before the X-Men, as she has unlimited power potential. Confused, Rogue goes to Cody's house. There, Mystique, disguised first as Wolverine and then as Storm, attacks her to scare her away from the heroes.
Who are you and what do you want?
You, girlie. I want you!
When the real Wolverine, Nightcrawler, and Kitty Pryde find her, she's already terrified. Nightcrawler tries to talk to her, but an impatient Kitty Pryde attacks. In the ensuing chaos, Rogue touches Nightcrawler, absorbing his teleportation powers and knocking him unconscious. Things only get worse. Paranoid, Rogue flees and ends up touching Storm, absorbing her weather control powers as well. Out of control, she creates a massive storm and nearly electrocutes the real Storm, who is lying helpless in a pool of water. Desperate, she teleports away. Xavier realizes Mystique is behind everything, and Wolverine confirms it when he catches her scent. Nightcrawler wakes up, and Kitty Pryde is visibly relieved, showing that she might be starting to like the Blue Elf. In the end, Mystique, as Principal Darkholme, welcomes Rogue to Bayville High. Magneto speaks with Mystique, who assures him that all of Rogue's positive memories of the X-Men have been erased. But alone, Rogue clutches the communicator Jean gave her, leaving a glimmer of hope. Sometime later, we meet Fred, the Blob, a guy who works as the world's strongest man at a monster truck show. Raven Darkholme, aka Mystique, shows up and offers him a spot in the Brotherhood of Mutants in Bayville. On his very first day of school, he immediately throws his weight around. He grabs Duncan by the collar and hurls him aside, nearly toppling a row of lockers on top of him. Luckily, Jean Grey appears to cool things down. Meanwhile, in drama class, Rogue and Scott are paired up for a scene. The tension is palpable. She makes it clear that she's not afraid of him but wants his weirdo friends to keep their distance. Real welcoming, right? At lunch, the Blob arrives with a tray of food that looks like a feast for an army. He trips, flipping the table, and food goes flying everywhere, hitting the popular crowd dead on. A fight breaks out and the cafeteria turns into a war zone. Jean tries to intervene but is nearly hit by a table. Scott, seeing this, uses his powers and pulverizes it. Later, the Blob asks Jean out, but she turns him down. The guy can't take no for an answer and kidnaps her, setting up a bizarre candlelit dinner. Desperate, Jean uses her powers to send a telepathic SOS to Professor X. Wolverine and Cyclops come to the rescue.
Through you, if necessary.
But the Blob is incredibly strong and knocks them both out. Just as he's about to crush Jean, Rogue appears out of nowhere. She absorbs Cyclops' powers and the Blob's strength, becoming a mix of laser beams and brute force. With a single blow, she sends the villain flying into a junkyard. Jean asks why she helped, but Rogue, confused, runs away. The X-Men now owe her one. We're in a basketball game. Aurora, aka Storm, is in the stands cheering for her nephew, Evan Daniels. At the last second, Pietro Maximoff passes him the ball and he scores the winning basket, but as he lands, bone spikes shoot out of his arms. Evan quickly hides them, but not before both Storm and Pietro see what happened. Storm tries to convince her nephew to come to the Xavier Institute, but he's a stubborn teenager and wants nothing to do with it. To make matters worse, Pietro, who is also a mutant, sets him up. He uses his super speed to destroy the school's lockers and frames Evan, who ends up getting arrested. That's where the X-Men step in. Scott makes him an offer he can't refuse. If Evan joins the school, Professor Xavier will use use his influence to get him out of jail. With little choice, he accepts. Across town, Magneto and Mystique plan to recruit the speedster Pietro for the Brotherhood. Their strategy? To organize a basketball rematch. Evan, now going by the codename Spike, begins training in the danger room. Soon after, he finds out about the game and immediately confronts Pietro. The fight spills out of the court and into the middle of the street. Jean and Scott show up to help, and together the three X-Men manage to defeat the speedster. In the end, Evan is cleared of all charges, but Magneto appears and breaks Pietro out of jail, who agrees to join the villains team. Next up, the X-Men are arguing about whether or not to go to a party. Scott, ever the responsible leader, thinks it's too risky. Kurt, aka Nightcrawler, just wants to have some fun. The argument heats up and Scott ends up pulling Kurt's tail. Furious, Kurt teleports to the basement, breaking his image inducer, the device that makes him look human. Kurt hides in a room and accidentally activates a self-destruct system. In the confusion, he finds a strange device. Rogue hears the noise, comes down to investigate, and the two start fighting over the device. In the struggle, she accidentally zaps him, and poof, Kurt vanishes. Trapped in a parallel dimension. Who finds the device next? The Toad, who starts using it like a toy, making things disappear, including Mystique's brand new car. Meanwhile, in the midverse, Kurt finds Forge, the creator of that dimension, who's been trapped there since the 70s. Together, they hatch a plan. At school, the X-Men and the Brotherhood start fighting, each team thinking the other made Kurt disappear. Jean and Scott catch a glimpse of Nightcrawler for a split second and figure out what's going on. They find the Blob, and a fight for the device breaks out. It's an all-out brawl. Kitty phases through walls at Avalanche, and Spike creates spike barriers against the Blob. Kurt and Forge use the battery from Mystique's car to power the portal and come driving back through the dimension, running over both the device and the Blob in the process. With the problem solved, Scott and Kurt make up and finally decide to go to the party. We're in the middle of an X-Men rescue mission, complete with Kitty phasing through the floor and Evan using his spikes to scale walls. The plan is to rescue Rogue, and Cyclops is in command. All business. But when they finally get close, Rogue doesn't respond. Suddenly, the laser floor that Jean was holding with her mind vanishes, and Scott and Nightcrawler fall. And who emerges from the shadows? Rogue. She grabs Scott's hand, steals his powers, and fires an optic blast at Nightcrawler. Desperate, Scott yells to stop the simulation. That's right, it was all a training exercise. Xavier appears and explains that Rogue was the wild card because life is full of them. Scott is upset, arguing that Rogue shouldn't be the enemy. The next day, the school announces a field trip, but Jean is barred at the last minute for having too many absences. A setup by Principal Darkholme, who we know is Mystique. And who takes her place? Rogue, making Scott even more irritated. On the trip, the bus nearly falls off a snowy cliff, but Scott saves everyone with an optic blast. Rogue is actually impressed. Later, she challenges Scott to a snowmobile race, which turns dangerous as she plays dirty to win. Later, in a cave, Scott confronts Rogue. He tries to tell her he wants to be her friend, but she's heard that she's the enemy in their training exercises and doesn't believe him. That's when Mystique appears, reveals her true form, and shoves Scott off a cliff. Horrified, Rogue absorbs Mystique's memories and discovers the entire manipulation. Filled with regret, she rescues a wounded Scott. To make matters worse, Mystique returns to attack. Powerless, Scott asks Rogue to absorb his powers and fire a signal blast.
There!
The X-Jet arrives, Logan rescues them both, and Rogue finally chooses a side. Back at the mansion, she officially becomes an X-Man, and Xavier promises more trust and fewer secrets from now on. Evan, our dear Spike, gets a bad grade and, for extra credit, has to film a documentary about teenage life. He starts filming Kitty and Rogue at school. Kitty is crushing on some guy named Jason, the star of the school play, while Rogue is in her usual sarcastic mode. The two end up deciding to compete for a role in the play. Meanwhile, a not-so-friendly guy named Saber-tooth attacks Evan, watches his camera's tape, and discovers the location of the mansion. He's like a 90s stalker, but with claws and a lot more fur. Back at the school, Logan is training with Scott when he finds Saber-tooth's message on Evan's tape. Sure enough, the villain tears through the front gates and attacks. The X-Men team up and manage to drive him off, but Xavier figures out his plan. Saber-tooth is going to use one of the students as bait to lure out Wolverine. Evan overhears the conversation and, in a stroke of genius, decides to handle it himself. He convinces Kitty and Rogue to leave the school to lure Saber-tooth into a trap. The plan? To film the two of them rehearsing in the woods. Rogue even uses her powers to absorb Kitty's dance moves, but the plan goes wrong. Saber-tooth appears, throws Evan aside, and knocks Kitty out. Just as he's about to attack Rogue, Wolverine arrives. The fight begins, and Rogue, seeing her chance, attacks Saber-tooth from behind and absorbs his powers. She transforms into a female version of Saber-tooth, complete with claws, fangs, and fur, and even complains that she had just shaved her legs the night before. Logan is impressed by her courage but furious at her recklessness. The result? All three of them are grounded. They take the unconscious Saber-tooth to Alaska, where Xavier wipes his mind. In the end, Evan's film becomes a tribute to his new family, the X-Men, with everyone applauding him at the premiere. Mystique decides the world needs more chaos and frees Juggernaut from a maximum security prison. Her plan is simple. She helps him get revenge on Xavier, and in return, he steals Cerebro. But Juggernaut couldn't care less about deals. He just wants to smash things and goes on a destructive rampage. Meanwhile, the X-Men and the Brotherhood of Mutants are at a survival camp, and the rivalry is intense. Scott and Lance are at each other's throats, and things heat up during an obstacle course, with both secretly using their powers. To settle the score, the camp sergeant issues a challenge. The first team to grab a flag at the top of a mountain wins. Both teams set off, but the race turns into a disaster. The Brotherhood tries to take a shortcut through an abandoned mine and ends up getting buried in a cave-in. The X-Men, who were about to win, see the danger and decide to stop to rescue their rivals. Scott finally acts like a true leader. At the mansion, Juggernaut arrives with all the subtlety of a bulldozer. He takes on Wolverine, destroys half the house, including Cerebro, and corners Professor X in the danger room. Mystique, who followed him, is furious that her plan has fallen apart. That's when the cavalry arrives. The X-Men and the Brotherhood show up together in the jet. What follows is a mutant version of Avengers assemble. The only way to stop Juggernaut is to remove his helmet, which protects him from Xavier's powers. An epic coordinated attack begins. Blob throws him. Nightcrawler undoes one latch of the helmet. Avalanche knocks him off balance. Quicksilver undoes another. Storm disorients him. And Kitty and Rogue, in a perfect move, release the final two. Toad uses his tongue to rip off the helmet, and Xavier is finally able to neutralize his stepbrother. In the end, the X-Men and the Brotherhood celebrate together. An unlikely but powerful alliance. Rogue and Kitty are chilling in their room when Rogue has a terrifying nightmare. In the dream, a woman flees a castle with a baby in her arms, pursued by wolves and a man. On a rope bridge, she tries to protect the baby, but ends up dropping the poor thing into the river. Rogue wakes up screaming and quickly realizes that the baby in the dream was, in fact, Kurt. Everyone rushes to the room to see what happened. Xavier, being the telepath he is, takes a look inside Rogue's mind and sees the full scene. The woman in the dream is Mystique. He also sees a couple rescuing little Kurt from the river while Mystique watches from a distance before simply turning her back. Xavier figures out that Rogue is experiencing the repressed memories of someone she touched, most likely Mystique, back in the cave, but decides to keep the secret for now. The next day, Xavier goes to the school and corners Raven Darkholme, the principal who is Mystique in disguise. He asks her about Kurt and the castle, and she gets pissed, telling him to get lost. Before leaving, he tells Logan the castle's location, and Wolverine takes off in the Blackbird. Mystique, disguised as a student, overhears Kurt venting about wanting to know the truth and devises a plan. She has Pietro, her speedster son, deliver a note to Kurt, setting up a meeting. Meanwhile, Wolverine arrives at the castle and discovers it was a DNA lab, but the whole place blows up before he can investigate. Kurt meets Mystique, who drops the bombshell, "Son." The guy freaks out, but before he can get any answers, the Brotherhood of Mutants appears. A massive fight breaks out. Rogue absorbs Avalanche's powers to try and stop Mystique, but she says it's too late, turns into a crow, and vanishes into the air. Back at the mansion, Xavier tells the core team everything, and they decide not to reveal the truth to Nightcrawler. Sometime later, Wolverine is having an intense nightmare. He wakes up in a tank of green liquid, slashes the glass with his new claws, and escapes through a snowy forest. He jolts awake in his room, feeling a very real pain. Cut to Kitty, who just wants some peace and quiet to write an email to her parents, but the mansion is in chaos. She complains about the lack of privacy, how Rogue annoys her, how noisy the other X-Men are, and how Wolverine is a lone wolf. The mood darkens when a news report mentions mentions attacks by a supposed Bigfoot in Canada. Wolverine gets worked up, slams the door, and completely trashes his own room. Xavier goes to talk to him and explains that the nightmares are actually repressed memories from his time as a test subject in the Weapon X project, and that a place called Mount McKenna has everything to do with it. Wolverine, of course, decides to go there alone, but Kitty, trying to find a quiet corner, had hidden in the Blackbird. Nightcrawler pops in to scare her, and suddenly, the jet takes off with both of them on board. Up front, Wolverine is piloting, but is clearly not in his right mind.
Are you following me?
We're not following you. I was just...
He even lashes out at Nightcrawler with his claws and, realizing he's not in control, locks himself in the cockpit to protect them. They land in the mountains, and we discover why. A mad scientist is controlling Wolverine with a chip in his brain, and Saber-tooth is there as his muscle. The plan is to use Nightcrawler and Kitty as test subjects to train Wolverine to be a mutant hunter. A frantic chase begins. At one point, Wolverine thinks Kitty has died and lets out a howl of grief, but she reappears, and with a heartfelt talk, manages to break the mind control. The final showdown happens in the lab. Shadowcat, in full-on hacker mode, phases through the control panel and fries the entire system, freeing Wolverine. The place starts to explode, and Nightcrawler teleports Kitty out just in time. Back at the mansion, the chip is removed. Kitty finishes her email, but now with a new perspective. Despite the mess, this place is like a family. The weekend has barely started, and the trouble is already brewing. Jean Grey is walking home from school when she's attacked by Toad. She deals with him quickly, tossing him into a well, but then, out of nowhere, a silvery metal sphere appears and abducts Jean. Cut to Hawaii, we meet Alex, a surfer who during a shark attack discovers he has powers. Back at the mansion, Cerebro goes off, and Xavier learns that this Alex is none other than Scott's brother, who everyone thought died in the plane crash. Before the X-Men can do anything, Magneto appears before Alex, giving him the classic, "I understand you, come with me, and I'll show you the way" speech. Xavier, Scott, and Logan rush to Hawaii. Scott and Alex finally have an emotional reunion, which doesn't last long. Alex, already swayed by Magneto's words, convinces Scott to enter one of the mysterious spheres with him. Meanwhile, Rogue, Kitty, Evan, and Nightcrawler, feeling left behind, decide to hit the road for a beach trip, but the Brotherhood of Mutants is already on their tail. The situation descends into total chaos. Magneto takes control of the Blackbird, throws Wolverine into the ocean, and takes Xavier prisoner on his Asteroid M. On Earth, fights break out everywhere. Mystique attacks Storm at the mansion. Nightcrawler's crew faces the Brotherhood on the highway, and Wolverine, who swam to an island, comes face to face with Saber-tooth. Magneto reveals his plan to Xavier, a trial by fire where only the strongest mutants who win their battles will be taken to his sanctuary.
They can then fully realize their mutant abilities, safe from those who might mistreat them.
The metal spheres begin capturing the winners of the fights, and soon Storm, Rogue, and the already captured Jean are imprisoned. In the end, Magneto shows Xavier his trump card, containment tubes holding the X-Women, and, to make matters worse, reveals that Scott and Alex are now on his side. Xavier is in shock, realizing he's lost this round badly. On the beach, the team questions Toad about what's going on, and he basically spills the beans, revealing Magneto's entire plan. Meanwhile, on Asteroid M, Professor X tries to get through to Scott, who's acting like he's on a spiritual retreat with Magneto. Xavier points to Jean, Rogue, and Storm, as if to say, and them, did they just come to listen too? Scott gets annoyed, but Magneto, being the cautious host he is, simply puts Professor X in stasis. Before he's frozen, Xavier sends one last mental message to Wolverine, telling him to lose the fight. Back on the island, Wolverine obeys. He lets Saber-tooth think he's won, taking a punch and falling off a cliff. As soon as the villain's ride is gone, Wolverine gets up, dusts himself off, and steals a helicopter. Genius. At the X-Mansion, the new recruits find Mystique, who's furious that Magneto discarded her. She's planning a little visit to settle the score, and Wolverine shows up at the perfect time, telling her she's not going alone. They take the new jet, the XM Velocity, which has a special feature, a zero metal composition, perfect for a party at the Master of Magnetism's place. On the asteroid, Magneto shows the Summers brothers his new invention, a genetic evolver that promises to supercharge mutant powers. To prove it works, he throws Saber-tooth inside, who emerges bigger and more savage. Scott and Alex are next. They step into the machine and come out as white-haired adults, their emotions deleted. That's when the X-Men's jet arrives. Magneto tries to use his powers, but it doesn't work, so he sends his new soldiers, Scott and Alex, to attack. Wolverine, in an act of pure chaos, crashes the plane into the two brothers. An all-out brawl begins. Mystique Mystique ends up falling into the Evolver along with Magneto. The entire asteroid starts to fall apart. In the chaos, Scott and Alex fall into the vacuum of space, but use their combined powers to land safely and, while they're at it, blow up the asteroid before it can crush everyone. The power surge returns them to normal, and the X-Men's jet comes back to rescue them. Scott apologizes, and Xavier offers Alex a place on the team. Another day, another high school event. It's a girls' soccer game, and Jean Grey scores the winning goal. Scott goes to congratulate her, but is shoved aside by Duncan, the popular jock, who hugs Jean and walks her off. Scott is left with a look on his face like he just lost the last slice of pizza. Later, Scott is driving with Nightcrawler and Kitty, totally distracted and moping. Suddenly, they find themselves in the middle of a police chase. A runaway car ends up dangling from a bridge, about to fall onto a school bus. After a quick debate about breaking the X-Men's #1 rule, don't get seen, they decide to act. Nightcrawler teleports the driver out, and Scott gives the car a gentle nudge with his optic blast, pushing it away from the bus. Mission accomplished, and they vanish before the press arrives. At the mansion, Xavier and Logan see the news, and instantly know it was Scott. They have a serious father-son talk, with Scott wanting to stop hiding, and Xavier insisting the world isn't ready. The next day at school, the Brotherhood of Mutants is hanging around. Lance, aka Avalanche, clearly has a thing for Kitty. To get her attention, he uses his powers to make the new principal, Edward Kelly, trip. Kitty laughs, and Lance gets carried away, causing a tremor that nearly drops the scoreboard on the principal's head. Kitty is not amused. Later, he tries to apologize, but Scott steps in to defend Kitty, and Lance, annoyed, decides it's time to stop hiding. During a school event, complete with TV cameras, the Brotherhood crashes the field. Lance grabs the microphone and pulls off the biggest expose ever. He announces that they are mutants and that the Xavier Institute is full of them, name-dropping Jean and Scott. Chaos erupts. The Brotherhood starts destroying everything, and the X-Men spring into action. In the middle of the fight, the school mascot statue falls towards Kitty, but Lance shoves her out of the way, getting caught underneath it instead. Panicked, Kitty uses her powers to phase him out of the rubble. Xavier, seeing the mayhem, decides to use his powers to erase everyone's memory. He succeeds with the students, but collapses before he can finish the job on Principal Kelly. To make matters worse, they discover the TV broadcast was cut off by magnetic interference. The conclusion: Magneto is alive, and their secret might not be so safe after all. At a school ceremony, Jean wins an award, but during her speech, she starts hearing everyone's thoughts. The overload is so intense that she freaks out, knocks over the awards table, and screams. Suddenly, the voices stop, and she cracks a joke to cover it up. Later, we meet the new chemistry teacher and gymnastics coach, Mr. McCoy, a good-natured guy who immediately teaches the class how to make a stink bomb. Meanwhile, the vibe between Lance and Kitty becomes increasingly friendly. That night, there's a party at Duncan's house. Scott goes reluctantly, only for Jean. Rogue is off to the side, and her new friend, Risty, teases her, saying she has a crush on Scott. The tension rises when Scott and Duncan face off in a game of ping pong that feels more like a life-or-death duel for Jean's attention. The redhead gets fed up, and her powers explode again. She telekinetically throws Scott off the balcony, but manages to catch him just inches from the pool. The next day, Jean's powers are completely out of control. During track practice, she accidentally launches a javelin toward Kitty, but Lance saves her once again, using his powers to knock her to the ground. Jean continues to cause chaos, and Professor McCoy displays superhuman reflexes by catching shot puts in midair. Jean finally collapses. Back at the Institute, the situation is critical. Jean is at the center of a psychic hurricane in the lab. The plan is risky. Rogue will try to absorb the excess power while Scott attempts to connect with her mind. Rogue manages to touch Jean but is thrown across the room. Cyclops catches her, and through him, Jean's desperate voice echoes. Cyclops gives an emotional speech, saying he knows her better than anyone. His words work. Jean calms down, and Rogue comes too. But the moment everything is resolved, Cyclops rushes to Jean's side, leaving a heartbroken Rogue on the floor. Later, Scott gives Jean a bouquet of roses, but says they're from Duncan. Jean, who barely remembers what happened, casually remarks that she likes that he knows her better than anyone, repeating his words, oblivious to the weight they carried for Rogue. The X-Men are training on some cliffs, and Nightcrawler is playing the victim. Tabitha's mission is to rescue him, but she does it in the most careless coolest way possible. She descends on a stretcher, blows up the rocks where Kurt is trapped with her energy bombs, and even makes fun of his codename. But the plan goes wrong. The stretcher activates, but Kurt falls because she forgot to fasten the safety belt. He teleports back up, telling her she's lost 10 points. Annoyed, Tabitha starts swinging the stretcher and throwing bombs everywhere. Wolverine yells at them to stop, but the stretcher hits the cliff wall, knocking Kurt out as he plummets toward the ocean. To save the day, Cyclops blasts the rocks below, and Wolverine dives off the cliff to rescue Nightcrawler. Back at the Institute, Xavier chews them out and puts them on lockdown for 2 weeks. No going out, no using powers, and 2 daily training sessions with Logan. Meanwhile, at the Brotherhood house, which is a complete dump, Toad is eating flies in the kitchen. Quicksilver shows up, complaining there's nothing to eat. Toad says he knows where to get some cash and tries to break down Mystique's bedroom door, but only succeeds in taking a few tumbles. Blob and Lance call him a genius, and Lance announces he's heading to school, with Toad tagging along to ensure his own safety. At school, Tabitha's father shows up looking for her, but is told he needs authorization from the Xavier Institute. Later, Tabitha runs into her father in the hallway. He says he wants the family to work things out, but she doesn't believe him and walks away. At lunch, Kurt, with a goofy, love-struck look on his face, tries to get closer to her, but Scott warns him to be careful. Afterward, Tabitha meets up with Lance, who gets a free soda by shaking the vending machine. To one-up him, she simply blows up the machine, sending soda and money flying. Lance invites her to join the Brotherhood, but she laughs and refuses. At the Institute, her father threatens Xavier, but Wolverine appears and intimidates him. Tabitha arrives and ends up agreeing to help her father steal some money, on the condition that he disappears from her life forever. They agree to meet at the school carnival. That night in the park, the Brotherhood overhears their plan and decides to steal the money for themselves. An all-out brawl breaks out in the abandoned gym. Tabitha's father manages to grab the money and flees to the roof, but the structure begins to collapse. He refuses to let go of the cash, and they both fall. Nightcrawler saves them, but her father shoves him aside and tries to escape with the money, only to be stopped by the police. In the end, her father is arrested. Tabitha tells Xavier that the X-Men aren't for her and leaves, showing up at the Brotherhood's house. She kicks down the door to Mystique's room, the only decent place in the house, and warns everyone to stay away. Red alert! Juggernaut's containment cell is failing. At the Xavier mansion in the middle of the night, Professor X gathers the students and warns them of the emergency. He says that although Juggernaut hasn't escaped yet, his containment is failing. Scott is ready to assemble the team, but Xavier shuts him down. He's going alone. With Storm and Wolverine away, Xavier puts Scott and Jean in charge, and Jean even playfully calls Scott Professor S. As soon as Xavier leaves, the power goes to Scott's head, and he immediately wants to send everyone to the danger room. The exhausted team ignores him and goes to bed. While Xavier deals with Juggernaut, he discovers that someone intentionally sabotaged the containment system. Back in Bayville, the other X-Men set Scott and Jean up on a date, but they end up stranded in the middle of nowhere when the car breaks down. Jean gets furious, thinking it's a cheap trick by Scott to get her alone. Meanwhile, a party is in full swing at the mansion. Risty, who is actually Mystique in disguise, brings along a hacker friend, Weber. The kid is good and not only breaches the mansion's system, but also gains access to Cerebro. Messing with the controls, he accidentally activates the danger room and unleashes a crazy game program called Arcade, which traps Shadowcat, Nightcrawler, Spike, and Rogue inside. Things get serious when Nightcrawler is injured. The group tries to fight back, but Arcade is relentless and nearly eliminates them. Luckily, Nightcrawler recovers just in time to teleport everyone to safety. Outside, Scott and Jean finally arrive to find the party and the mansion's security system turned against them. They have to fight their way into their own home. Once inside Cerebro, they discover that Weber is responsible for the mess. Before Arcade can attack again, Rogue shows up with Nightcrawler and settles the score with a single touch, defeating the game's villain. Xavier returns just in time and to everyone's surprise, reveals it was all a setup. Someone wanted him out of the way so they could infiltrate the mansion. Outside, Risty transforms back into Mystique, smiling devilishly as she looks at a disc she managed to steal from the system. In Hank's class, Evan is more focused on making a toy car with nails and rubber bands than paying attention. Suddenly, the professor feels a bizarre pain, runs to the bathroom, and, in a fit of rage, rips the sink off the wall. Later, Evan finds Hank in the school's amphitheater, completely out of his mind. The professor nearly attacks him, but manages to return to normal just in time. Back at the Institute, the X-Men team fails a danger room simulation because Evan, who was supposed to be there to help, showed up late. Storm gives her nephew a serious lecture, telling him he's becoming a slacker. Meanwhile, Kitty, desperate about a geometry test, buys a blue pyramid-shaped hat that supposedly stimulates the brain. Yes, it's as ridiculous as it sounds. Hank's condition worsens. He goes to the mansion to ask Xavier for help, who discovers there's nothing he can do. The transformation is inevitable. At school, Hank finally loses control and fully transforms into the Beast. Principal Kelly hears the screams, finds the trashed classroom, and upon seeing Hank's lab coat on the floor, concludes that the professor is the monster causing the chaos. The X-Men watch the news and realize they need to find the Beast before the police do to prevent the existence of mutants from being exposed. The hunt begins. Jean and Kitty find him in a junkyard, where Jean throws a car at him to try and restrain him. Wolverine shows up and the two engage in a feral fight. But the Beast manages to escape. It's Evan who figures out where Hank went, the amphitheater. He tries to talk to the Beast but is nearly attacked. To calm the monster, Evan begins reciting the passage from Shakespeare that Hank had asked him to memorize. With telepathic help from Xavier, who arrives just in time, Hank finally regains control of himself. Back at the Institute, Hank accepts his new form. He can no longer be Mr. McCoy, as he is now a fugitive. Xavier then invites him to be the newest teacher at the Institute, now under the name Beast. We open in Hawaii, where Scott is babysitting his brother, Alex Summers. While Alex is catching waves like a pro, Scott stays on the beach, keeping an eye on him through a camera attached to the surfboard. Basically, Alex is living the dream, and Scott is on the clock. Scott warns that a massive storm is approaching, but Alex, in full young and invincible mode, ignores him. Of course, it goes south. He catches an insane barrel, but then gets wiped out and dragged away by the current. Desperate, Scott wants to call for help, but Alex tells him not to, or he'll be embarrassed. Scott's brilliant solution: steal a boat and go rescue his brother himself. Alex even tries to help by firing off power blasts like flares, but exhaustion hits and he passes out. Meanwhile, at the Institute, Kitty gets a call from Lance asking her out, but she's completely distracted by Nightcrawler, who appears all buff and flexing his muscles. Turns out it was just his image inducer. After getting chewed out by Kitty, Nightcrawler leaves and tests out other looks. First, he becomes super fat, and then he appears before Jean with a giant head, nearly giving her a heart attack. Back to the chaos in Hawaii, the brothers' boat runs out of gas. Suddenly, a gigantic wave threatens to swallow them, but Scott uses his optic blast to part the wave, like Moses parting the Red Sea. The flash of light attracts a rescue helicopter, but their luck is short-lived. Another wave capsizes the boat and a lightning bolt strikes the helicopter, which crashes into the sea with Alex hanging on. When all seems lost, the Blackbird appears. Storm holds back a tornado while Jean uses her telekinesis to pull the boys inside. Back at the mansion, Professor Xavier plays a prank on Nightcrawler, and when he goes to visit Scott, his image inducer transforms him into a female version of himself. Everyone bursts out laughing. It's Christmas time in New York City. A mysterious man watches a news report about a fire and, without a second thought, unfurls a pair of white wings and flies to rescue a trapped woman. He leaves her to safety and vanishes, and the woman swears to her daughter that she was saved by a real angel. Meanwhile, at the Xavier Institute, the holiday party is in full swing. Nightcrawler tries to steal a kiss from Kitty with a mistletoe, Rogue gives Scott a present, making Jean jealous, and Wolverine, as usual, turns down the invitation to stay for the party. The students start leaving to spend the holidays with their families, and the mansion becomes nearly empty. Our winged hero, Angel, stops a mugging in Central Park and makes the news. Professor Xavier sees the reports and sends Rogue and Cyclops to New York to recruit the supposed mutant. What they don't know is that Magneto is also keeping an eye on Angel. Magneto creates major chaos on the Brooklyn Bridge just to lure Angel out. He saves a family, but Magneto uses his powers to make it look like Angel intentionally knocked a little girl off the bridge. The crowd turns against him, calling him a freak. Later, Angel visits the girl in the hospital, but has to flee. Rogue and Cyclops, who were also there, find one of his feathers and pursue him. At a church, Magneto finally confronts Angel and tries to recruit him by force. The X-Men duo arrives just in time to help. In the fight, Rogue manages to touch Magneto and absorb his powers, kicking off an epic chase through the city. Magneto sets a trap and nearly crushes her with a piece of a building, but Angel appears at the last second and saves her. In the end, they invite Angel to the Institute, but he seems to prefer continuing on his own path. We go straight to Africa, where a witch doctor is announcing that he has finally found his lost goddess. Cut to Bayville, where Storm is clearly going through a tough time. During a training session with Evan, Spike, she has a claustrophobic attack and gets trapped, which leaves her deeply shaken. From there, things only get worse. Storm starts hearing whispers and seeing shadows everywhere. She has nightmares, sees a skull in her bathroom mirror, and becomes increasingly unstable. Professor Xavier, concerned, thinks it's due to the stress of dealing with Evan and decides to send him home. The problem? Evan overhears the conversation and is furious, thinking no one cares about him. Meanwhile, Rogue starts to suspect her friend Risty, who knows about Storm's claustrophobia, something that was supposed to be a secret. The hint that something is wrong hangs in the air. At night, Storm has a flashback to when she was treated like a goddess in Africa. Suddenly, her balcony is filled with snakes, and she sees Spike running away. Desperate, she goes after him, but is intercepted by a man from her old tribe who tries to warn her about the witch doctor, Hungan. She ignores him, but it's too late. Hungan's men surround and capture her. Spike sees everything and rushes to warn the professor. Hungan traps Storm in a cage and uses a mystical staff to control her, forcing her to attack the X-Men when they arrive to rescue her. The situation seems hopeless until Spike, in a heroic act, uses his powers to shatter the staff's crystal, freeing Storm from the mind control. Once recovered, Storm turns the tables and creates a tornado that swallows Hungan. She faints, but Spike catches her. The next day, as a reward for saving her life, Storm gives Evan a second chance at the Institute. He runs to tell the others, and everyone celebrates. Lance, aka Avalanche, decides he wants to be an X-Man and makes the most subtle entrance possible by smashing through the Institute's gates at night. All hell breaks loose, and the X-Men get out of bed to see what the commotion is about. Wolverine shows up with his claws out, but Lance surprises everyone by asking to join the team. Xavier, always one for second chances, accepts his request. Scott, aka Cyclops, is shocked, thinking it's a trap, but Professor X sees the real reason. Lance is doing all this to get closer to Kitty. Xavier tells Scott to give him the benefit of the doubt and asks Kitty to show the new guy to a guest room. Then, the welcome training begins. In the first session, a flight simulator, Bobby, aka Iceman, sends the jet into a nosedive just for kicks, and Lance stumbles out nearly sick. Later, during an exercise with flying blades, Scott taunts Lance about his old uniform. Lance gets pissed, shakes the entire floor, and destroys not only the targets but the machines as well. The team cheers, and Kitty finds it amusing, leaving Scott looking defeated. Revenge comes in the danger room, where Scott activates a giant padded pillar that knocks Lance to the ground just to mess with him. The humiliation continues during a pool rescue drill. Lance was supposed to save Rogue, but he ends up hitting her in the head with the lifebuoy and rescues Kitty instead. Rogue storms past them, calls Lance disgusting, and shoves them both back into the pool. To make matters worse, the Brotherhood corners him at school, telling him he'll never be accepted by the X-Men. The situation goes south for good when the New Mutants take the X-Men's van for a joyride and blame it on Lance. Not satisfied, they decide to take the Blackbird for a spin. Lance realizes how bad this is, calls Kitty, and the two jump into the moving jet. The chaos escalates until they are intercepted by Air Force fighters. In the midst of the mayhem, Kitty does the impossible. She concentrates and phases the entire jet through a mountain, saving everyone. The next day, the truth comes out. The New Mutants confess everything and are grounded. Scott tries to apologize, but Lance has had enough. He says being an X-Man is too much work and that he's going back to the Brotherhood. Kitty can't take it, runs up to him, and gives him a goodbye kiss. Lance leaves, but with a small smile on his face, leaving a heartbroken Kitty behind. Jean Grey is pushing Magma hard in training, trying to teach the girl to stand on her own. But Cyclops, ever the overprotective hero, shows up to ruin everything and saves them both from a boulder that Jean already had under control. Jean is furious and lets him have it, saying she's tired of being treated like the damsel in distress. Meanwhile, at the Brotherhood house, Tabitha, aka Boom Boom, is bored. She heads to school and finds Amara, Magma, who's complaining about Jean's tough training. Tabitha, being the bad influence she is, convinces Amara to go to the mall. On the way, they witness a carjacking and decide to play hero. The chase is insane, and Jean shows up to help. Together, the three of them take down the thugs, complete with melted tires and explosions. Their feat makes the news, and the girls decide to keep their new career a secret. What follows is a wild montage. The girls shopping, dancing, and fighting crime in new outfits. Rogue and Kitty join in on the fun, and the group is dubbed the Bayville Sirens by the press. Scott, watching it all on TV, puts the pieces together and figures out what's going on. With a hint of jealousy, he drags Nightcrawler on a secret mission to spy on the girls. The Sirens fall into a trap set by a gang of car thieves who are losing business because of them. The fight breaks out in a warehouse, but Tabitha gets too carried away with her explosions and starts setting the place on fire. Scott and Nightcrawler just watch from the sidelines, and Scott only acts at the last second to save a thug from getting torched. After the girls handle the situation, a mysterious police officer appears, gives them a lecture, and lets them go. And who was the officer? None other than Mystique, who was in disguise the whole time, keeping an eye on her foster daughter, Rogue. Later, in the Institute's kitchen, Jean and Scott make up, and she says it felt good to help people openly, dreaming of a day they can do it without having to hide. Sometime later, Logan is in an insane motorcycle chase, fleeing from a military group. He's cornered, but Nick Fury, the head of S.H.I.E.L.D., appears and drops a bombshell. Project Rebirth, the super soldier formula, has been stolen, and the main suspect, due to magnetic pulses, is Magneto. Logan tells Xavier that this formula was only used once, on a guy named Steve Rogers, who became Captain America during World War II. In a flashback, we see a younger Logan fighting alongside Cap. There's just one problem. The process is slowly killing Captain America, which is why the formula was destroyed, or at least the first version of it. Meanwhile, at school, Nightcrawler's image inducer breaks, and a kid freaks out upon seeing his real appearance, leaving Kurt devastated. Back at the Institute, Rogue recalls some information she borrowed from Magneto and discovers he's hiding in the Sahara Desert. Logan, Rogue, and Nightcrawler head out. On the way, another flashback. Logan and Captain America are rescuing prisoners in Poland. Cap saves a little boy with mutant powers. His name, Eric, the future Magneto. Upon arriving at the base, they find Magneto inside the rebirth machine. Saber-tooth shows up to start a brawl with Wolverine, while Rogue and Nightcrawler try to plant a bomb. Just as they're about to detonate it, Magneto, from inside the machine, plays dirty. He says he'll die if Nightcrawler destroys the device and throws it in his face, that he would be just like your mother. Nightcrawler hesitates, and Magneto emerges from the machine completely rejuvenated. Apparently, the formula that destroys humans strengthens mutants. Wolverine knocks out Saber-tooth and finally destroys the machine. Magneto is furious, but since Nightcrawler spared his life, he lets the team go. In the end, we see Logan visiting Captain America, who is frozen in a cryogenic chamber, awaiting a cure for the side effects of Project Rebirth. Jean Grey wakes up from a tense nightmare filled with bizarre clowns, only to find herself floating 3 feet above her bed. The shock barely registers before a music box next to her starts playing on its own. When she opens it, a tattooed face springs out, and her scream must have been heard throughout the entire Institute. The next day, Jean is gone. While the X-Men search everywhere, the New Mutants decide to take a spin in the danger room without supervision, and to top it off, they leave poor Jamie out. Bad idea. The kid gets pissed, hacks the controls, and turns the training session into a nightmare mode. The mutants emerge completely exhausted, and Jamie appears with a victorious smirk, proving you should never underestimate the computer nerd. Meanwhile, the search for Jean turns into an international scavenger hunt. She appears in Boston, possessed, steals a ring from a museum, and tosses police cars around like they're toys. Then, she returns to the Institute, mind controls Scott, recruits Nightcrawler for her sinister cult, and disappears again. The next stop is New York, where they steal another ring and for good measure the X-Jet, leaving Wolverine and Scott stranded. Rogue finally solves the puzzle. The tattooed face from the music box belongs to a magician named Mesmero, from a circus they once visited. The entire team heads to the circus for the final showdown, which turns into a true X-Men civil war, with mutant fighting mutant. In the midst of the chaos, Xavier discovers the truth. Mesmero is just a puppet. A much more powerful mind is pulling the strings. The final scene cuts to Tibet, where Mesmero uses the rings to open a giant stone door, revealing a second door behind it. He kneels and speaks to his master, a being called Apocalypse. Sometime later, the school dance is approaching, and everyone is in full-on drama mode trying to find a date. On another front, Forge builds a device to supercharge Nightcrawler's teleportation. The gossip mill is churning. Kitty works up the courage and asks Avalanche, who is so happy he nearly causes an earthquake. Amanda asks Nightcrawler, and the two are more awkward than anime protagonists. Meanwhile, Jean and Rogue watch from afar as Taryn asks Scott to the dance. The teen romance vibe is thick in the air, but Nightcrawler's test goes a bit wrong. He manages to teleport but sees bizarre creatures in the dimension he passes through and accidentally leaves a portal open. It's like leaving the fridge door open, but with interdimensional monsters. On a second attempt, this time with Wolverine as a babysitter, they are attacked for real. Kurt is traumatized and swears never to use his power again. In the middle of the dance, the portals open and the party turns into a horror movie. Monsters everywhere, but the X-Men don't disappoint. Scott unleashes his optic blasts. Jean uses her telekinesis to slam a creature into the basketball hoop, and Avalanche helps out with an earthquake. Forge arrives with a weapon that looks straight out of Ghostbusters and sends the creatures back where they came from. In the end, Kurt reveals his true self to Amanda, who thinks it's awesome that he's blue. He asks her out for ice cream, proving that teenage love can overcome even a monster invasion. Beast is not handling his new blue furry appearance well. In the midst of an existential crisis, he goes for a nighttime stroll, spooks a couple of cops, and ends up smashing some windows, like a Hulk with a PhD who just wanted a little peace and quiet. Seeing her friend's despair, Kitty has a brilliant idea: a field trip to a massive forest. It's basically an X-Men summer camp to lift Beast's spirits. In the forest, while the students are having fun, Beast remains depressed, feeling he's losing his humanity. What he doesn't know is that the forest already has its own myth hunters. A group of Bigfoot hunters films him, mistakes him for the legend, and devises a plan to capture him. They manage to trap Beast in an electrified cage, but karma is swift. A storm causes a landslide that throws everyone into the river. The cage sinks with Beast inside. That's when the students spring into action. Iceman creates an ice dam, Sunspot uses his powers to rescue Beast, and the team even saves the hunters. But their gratitude is short-lived. As soon as they're safe, the hunters try to capture Beast again. Having lost all patience, the young mutants destroy their weapons and give them such a scare that the men run off, likely never to return to the forest. On the flight back, Beast realizes he's learned a valuable lesson about self-acceptance. He finally understands that it doesn't matter what he looks like. What counts is who he is on the inside. A lesson that applies to everyone, mutant or not. We open in an asylum. Where Professor Xavier is calmly waiting for a patient. Suddenly, a girl breaks free from her straitjacket and starts tearing everything apart like it's made of paper. The girl approaches Xavier, ready to attack. Without flinching, Xavier unleashes a psychic blast that knocks the girl out. This is Wanda Maximoff. He tries to talk to her about controlling her powers, but all she wants is to get out. Xavier tells her it's too risky. Just then, a doctor shows up to take Wanda for more tests, and surprisingly, she goes along peacefully. But on the way, Wanda realizes she's being kidnapped. She starts freaking out and trashing the place again, until the doctor opens a door. Inside, an old woman starts chanting magical words, and Wanda instantly passes out. The doctor then reveals herself. It was Mystique in disguise. At the school, Kurt can't get his locker open, so Kitty, trying to help, simply phases through the door and grabs his book. As a bonus, she offers him a muffin she made in class, but the thing is so disgusting that when Kurt drops it, the muffin starts bouncing on the floor. Elsewhere, Scott tries to confess his feelings to Jean, but her boyfriend Duncan pulls up in a fancy car and totally kills the mood. At the Brotherhood's house, Mystique has returned and is pissed about the mess the guys have made. She introduces Wanda, who happens to be Pietro's twin sister. Wanda freaks out again, and the Brotherhood tries to stop her, but it's no use. She turns Avalanche's own earthquake against him and sends Toad's slime right back in his face. The old woman, Agatha Harkness, appears and calms Wanda down once more. Mystique reveals her plan: to use Wanda to get revenge on her father, Magneto. After some training, it's time for the big test. The Brotherhood stages a fake robbery at the mall to lure out the X-Men. The fight begins, and Avalanche even tries to warn Kitty to get out of there because things are about to get ugly, and they do. Wanda shows up, and the horror show begins. She makes Scott's optic blasts go haywire, turns Spike's own spikes against him, pins Kitty to the floor, and messes with Kurt's teleportation. It's a massacre. The X-Men are forced to retreat, completely humiliated. The Brotherhood celebrates their victory, and Toad christens Wanda the Scarlet Witch. Straight to the action in the sewers. Wolverine and Saber-tooth are locked in a brutal fight. Wolverine ends up trapped in a green goo, and Saber-tooth escapes. Shortly after, soldiers led by a man named Trask arrive, annoyed that the other mutant got away. At the Institute, Jean can't locate Wolverine with Cerebro, and Professor Xavier gets angry, blaming her. Storm and Beast head to the sewers and find traces of the fight, as well as clues pointing to Magneto. Mystique shows up at the Brotherhood house with the news. Magneto has kidnapped Wolverine. No one understands why, but she already has a plan. Back at the Institute, Xavier puts the X-Men and the New Mutants through a danger room simulation against Magneto. The result? A total disaster. They're defeated in seconds. Xavier is furious and drops a bombshell. To get stronger, the X-Men will have to team up with the Brotherhood. Everyone is shocked. Cyclops refuses to accept the decision, resigns as leader, and storms off. Jean tries to go after him, but Xavier forbids it. Meanwhile, Wolverine wakes up at a military base. Trask explains that mutants are a threat and that he needs Logan's help for an experiment that will level the playing field. The experiment is none other than a giant mutant hunting robot, the Sentinel, and Wolverine is the first test subject forced to fight for his life against the machine. At the Institute, Jean finally pinpoints Wolverine's location. Xavier assembles the bizarre new team of X-Men and the Brotherhood, but as they prepare to leave, Mystique is in the mansion's control room, activating the self-destruct sequence. The team departs without Scott, and the mansion goes into lockdown, trapping the New Mutants inside. Only Amara manages to escape. Outside, she meets up with Tabitha and, moments later, Scott. Together, they realize something is very wrong with Mystique's plan. The project leader, Bolivar Trask, orders Logan to be restrained and wants the robot back online, essentially saying, let's go again. At the mansion, Scott leads the New Mutants through the defense systems, but it's too late to stop the self-destruct sequence. They make a desperate run for it, and the mansion explodes. Meanwhile, the mixed team of X-Men and Brotherhood finds Magneto's new crew, and an all-out brawl erupts. Gambit's cards explode, Saber-tooth takes on Beast, and Storm puts out Pyro's flames with rain and a bolt of lightning. In the middle of the chaos, Magneto simply rips open the ground, dropping everyone into Trask's underground base, right in front of the Sentinel. To top it all off, a news helicopter films the entire thing live. The world now knows about mutants. The Sentinel attacks everyone. It traps Blob and Spike in a green goo that hardens into stone. Storm tries to fight back but is taken down. Nightcrawler manages to damage the robot with a grenade, but it's not enough. The Sentinel then targets Magneto, who is standing on top of a building. That's when Wanda appears, surprising Quicksilver, and goes after her father. She uses her powers to block his, leaving Magneto completely vulnerable. Xavier's jet arrives to help, but Wanda diverts it with her magic. The distraction is just enough for Magneto to break free. He regains his powers just in time to redirect 2 missiles at the Sentinel. The robot explodes, and the debris rains down on Magneto himself. Nightcrawler saves Wanda from the fall, and the survivors regroup on Xavier's jet. They fly back home, only to find the Institute in ruins. Suddenly, Scott and the New Mutants emerge from the woods, dirty but alive. Blind with rage, Scott confronts Xavier, screaming that it's all his fault. He shoves the professor out of his wheelchair, and Xavier transforms into Mystique. Shocking everyone, she reveals she orchestrated the entire thing and delivers her parting shot. The worst is yet to come. Things kick off with a tense standoff between Cyclops and Mystique, both furious. Jean Grey tries to read the villain's mind to find out where Professor X is, but for some reason, Mystique is able to block her power like a mental firewall. Cyclops threatens Mystique, but she lays it on the line. If he ever wants to see the professor again, he'd better back off. The argument is cut short by sirens, and suddenly, they're surrounded by police, as if they're the country's most wanted criminals. It's every man for himself. The New Mutants are cornered. Boom Boom covers their escape by blowing up some trees just to be safe. The Brotherhood scrambles in another direction, with Scarlet Witch providing cover, but Jean is captured and thrown into a squad car. Nightcrawler teleports to rescue her, but Shadowcat yells for him to wait, and he stops at the last second. She simply phases through the police and the car door, getting inside like a ghost. Cyclops is left behind, but Storm swoops down from the sky and rescues him in true Superman fashion. Nightcrawler makes one last stop to grab Iceman, and they hit the gas. They're nearly caught at a police roadblock, but Jean uses her telekinesis to make the car float over everything, a scene worthy of the Fast and the Furious. The X-Men are now celebrities, but for all the wrong reasons. Their names are all over the news, and anti-mutant panic is spreading. Amidst the chaos, the X-Men and the Brotherhood meet up at a hideout. Mystique throws it in their faces that Magneto's plan only proved Xavier wrong. Humans and mutants will never coexist. Out of nowhere, Nick Fury appears with an army of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. Mystique tries to act like she's in charge, but Fury snaps his fingers, and his men surround everyone. He snaps again, and they stand down. A total power move. Fury hands over a disc with the location of the captured mutants, the infamous Area 51, and vanishes, saying he has his reasons. Mystique snatches the disc from Storm's hand and declares herself the new leader. The sky darkens and lightning begins to flash. Storm is furious, but Jean calms her down, reminding her that Mystique still has the professor. Mystique then starts giving orders, sending everyone to Area 51 to rescue the others. The invasion is a disaster, but Iceman drops a tool and the alarms go off. All hell breaks loose. In the chaos, Spike manages to free Wolverine, who returns the favor and frees the rest. When things get too hot, they escape through a duct in the ceiling. Cyclops is the last one through and in a masterful move, slams the grate shut in Mystique's face. He demands to know where Xavier is, but she refuses to talk. He leaves her behind, trapped in Area 51.
Let me through! You haven't got the... You lousy... She got what she deserves!
The team escapes, but at what cost? In the end, Storm says they need to show the world they're the good guys, before it's too late. The situation is dire. The Xavier Institute has been raided by government troops, and the only thing on TV is anti-mutant propaganda. Rogue and Logan are trying to buy food at a convenience store when soldiers recognize them. A fight is inevitable, and the two escape on Logan's motorcycle with the army hot on their tail. Meanwhile, in Washington, Storm and Beast are trying to plead the mutant case at a congressional hearing. Elsewhere, Juggernaut smashes through a train and heads towards a massive dam, like he's just taking a stroll in the park. The rest of the X-Men are hiding out in a cave, watching the hearing on a makeshift TV, when Logan and Rogue come crashing in, with military helicopters right behind them. Logan wants to fight, but Cyclops stops him, saying the X-Men are heroes, not soldiers. Wolverine disagrees, telling Cyclops that if he wants to be the boss, they can handle it themselves, and he leaves. The X-Men then disable the helicopters without hurting anyone and escape in the Blackbird. On the jet, they see the news about Juggernaut. Jean convinces Scott to intervene, using the classic argument.
What would the professor have us do?
The battle at the dam is epic. The X-Men work as a team. Spike knocks over a generator. Shadowcat faces it through the dam wall, and Nightcrawler manages to unlock Juggernaut's helmet, but Juggernaut breaks free and charges. Cyclops removes his visor and hits him with a full-force optic blast, knocking the helmet off. Even so, the villain doesn't stop. He grabs Cyclops by the head, ready to crush him. That's when Shadowcat and Rogue spring into action. Kitty propels Rogue forward, who manages to absorb Juggernaut's powers and mind. They both collapse, but Juggernaut gets up first, but then Rogue rises, now wielding all of his strength. She easily dodges a punch, lifts him over her head, and hurls him from the top of the dam. In midair, Iceman freezes him in a giant block of ice. At the hearing, everyone watches in shock. Storm seizes the moment. They did what they were trained to do, use their powers for good. At the dam, Rogue collapses again, but reveals the information she gleaned from Juggernaut's mind. She knows where Professor X is. They find him in a maximum security prison. Wolverine reappears and congratulates Cyclops on a job well done. The X-Men are now living underground, in the ruins of the mansion. Life isn't easy. Kitty and Nightcrawler catch some school bullies spray painting the grounds. The boys call them freaks, and Kitty vents that it was easier when only the Brotherhood hated them. To make matters worse, Jubilee's parents show up to take her away. Logan and Xavier feel guilty, knowing Mystique impersonated them and caused all this chaos. Xavier gathers the team and gives them the news. They can return to school for one day. That night, the school board will vote on whether to ban mutants permanently. The golden rule: no using their powers under any circumstances. At school, the vibe is straight out of a teen horror movie. The X-Men are stared at and taunted. Nightcrawler, using his image inducer, tries to distance himself from the group to fit in. Jean turns down Duncan, her ex-boyfriend, who wanted to use her powers to cheat on tests. Principal Kelly, pretending to be nice, invites the Brotherhood back to school, basically giving them a free pass to cause chaos, and they don't waste any time. Meanwhile, Duncan and his friends corner Scott, trying to provoke him into using his powers so he'll get expelled. Kitty and Rogue show up to defend him. Nightcrawler watches from a distance, doing nothing. Tensions explode at the board meeting, while Jean gives an emotional speech. Outside, the Brotherhood and Duncan's crew team up to attack the X-Men. Scott orders everyone not to fight back with their powers. They take a beating, trying only to protect themselves. But then, Avalanche, from the Brotherhood, starts bringing down the auditorium. Everyone runs outside, and Principal Kelly tries to use the chaos to blame the mutants. Xavier defends his students' incredible self-control. The Brotherhood pushes things too far, and the X-Men finally have to use their powers to save the innocent bystanders. Nightcrawler, seeing the mayhem, finally jumps into the fight to help. The next day, the surprising news: the board voted to allow them back in school. The students aren't happy, but Xavier gives an inspiring speech. He tells them they are pioneers and have a responsibility to pave the way for future mutants. He's proud, and no matter what happens, the X-Men will endure. Wanda is on a mission to find her father, Magneto, and to do so, she tracks down Caliban. But the guy says he can't track him, like when the Wi-Fi signal won't reach. Wanda doesn't like that answer, casts a hex, and Caliban, fed up, explains that Magneto is on a power level his mutant GPS can't pick up. Wanda's solution? Use her brother Pietro as bait. Meanwhile, the new mutants are cleaning up the destroyed X-Mansion. Shadowcat, in a hurry, phases through Beast and accidentally leaves her toothbrush inside him. Oops, she apologizes and fishes the object back out of her friend's chest. At the Brotherhood house, it's moving day. Toad is making fun of Quicksilver's uniform, and Avalanche simply throws all his former teammates' junk outside. Speaking of Quicksilver, Wanda finds him at a diner and causes a huge scene to get him to confess where Magneto is.
Bye! Wanda, I have no idea where he is.
He swears he doesn't know, that their father always just shows up out of the blue. Wanda's plan B is both brilliant and cruel. Turn her own brother over to the police and force Magneto to make an appearance. At school, Principal Kelly expels the Brotherhood. Avalanche gets pissed, accuses the principal of persecution, and even flips a desk at him. On his way out, he runs into Gambit, who wants to get the gang back together for a mission from Magneto. But Avalanche is tired of being a pawn in other people's games and tells him to get lost. The drama doesn't stop. Gambit shows up at the Brotherhood house, takes Toad hostage by rolling him up in a carpet, and blackmails the rest of the team. Either they rescue Quicksilver from a military convoy, or Toad becomes confetti. The mission is now personal for Avalanche, who wants to settle the score with the traitor. Rogue and Shadowcat follow the Brotherhood and arrive just in time for the showdown. In the middle of the fight, Blob throws the truck carrying Quicksilver off a cliff, but Shadowcat faces through it and saves him at the last second. Quicksilver, ungrateful as ever, calls her slow and disappears. Wanda, watching from afar, promises that her revenge isn't over yet. In the end, Gambit announces that Quicksilver is the new leader of the Brotherhood, with Daddy's protection. And at the X-Mansion, Rogue and Shadowcat get a nice long detention for skipping class. Mystique, who was left behind in Area 51, pulls off an escape worthy of a 007 movie. She knocks out a scientist, steals her appearance, and manages to get away, transforming into a crow and flying to freedom. Meanwhile, at the Institute, romance and renovations are in the air. Scott and Jean can't stop exchanging glances while fixing the roof. Storm and Wolverine play Cupid, telling the two to stop beating around the bush and just admit their feelings. Wolverine even threatens to make a move on Jean himself if Scott takes too long. At that moment, a crow, and we know exactly who it is, attacks Scott and vanishes into thin air. When Scott finally musters the courage to talk to Jean, the phone rings. It's Alex, his brother, saying he's lost in Mexico. Scott, extremely worried, drops everything to go rescue him. But of course, it's a trap set by Mystique. She knocks Scott out with gas and abandons him in the middle of the desert without his glasses. He spends a day and a night wandering blindly until he's attacked by coyotes and has to use his powers to defend himself. Far away, Jean wakes up from a nightmare, sensing that Scott is in danger. Xavier thinks it's just a bad dream. In Mexico, some oil rig workers see Scott's optic blasts and rescue him just in time. Mystique, who is watching the whole thing, is thoroughly annoyed. At the Institute, Jean discovers that Alex was never in Mexico. Scott wakes up in a hospital, accidentally causes some destruction, and flees, ending up lost in Mexico City. Mystique finds him and tries to knock him out again, but this time Scott fights back, and the battle begins. Jean starts having telepathic flashes of Scott's location, and the X-Men head out. The fight between Scott and Mystique is intense, and they end up falling into a dark basement. Suddenly, Jean appears and says that Mystique got away, but Scott, who is no fool, senses something is off when she mentions Cerebro in a strange way. It was Mystique in disguise. The real Jean arrives in the nick of time and lunges at the villain. Later, on the jet, set, Jane gives Scott a new pair of glasses. He asks how she found him, and she simply replies that she used their connection. The two finally get together, and the rest of the team watches, happy for the new couple. Meanwhile, a group of strange-looking mutants, the Morlocks, are breaking into a factory and trashing the place. When a security guard shows up, a little girl with giant hands simply touches him and paralyzes him. The factory owner, Guy Spear, decides not to call the police to avoid tarnishing the image of his new energy drink, Power 8. At school, Shadowcat is desperate for driving lessons, cutting down anyone with a driver's license. As for Evan, aka Spike, he's going through a tough time. A kid named Andrew pretends to be his friend but is actually just using him as a bodyguard. Evan refuses to fight but ends up getting attacked by some bullies and has to use his spikes to defend himself. Nightcrawler arrives just in time and teleports him away from the trouble. At the Institute, Xavier assigns Wolverine to give Shadowcat driving lessons. The lesson is a complete disaster, with Kitty phasing through the mansion gate and returning with the van covered in traffic signs and other random objects. Evan's situation also gets worse. He discovers bone plates have grown on his back, which he can't retract. During a skateboarding competition, a Morlock named Callisto warns Evan that the Power 8 drink is poison. He ignores her, takes a sip, and his powers go completely haywire, launching spikes everywhere. Evan runs away, and the Morlocks follow and capture him. Beast analyzes the drink and confirms it. It's toxic to mutants. In the sewers, the Morlocks explain that they are mutants who can't live on the surface and that Power 8 is contaminating their home. Evan's body is now covered in permanent spikes, and he agrees to help the Morlocks. They attack the factory again, but Spear and his security guards show up. During the fight, the Power 8 tanks are overturned, creating a toxic tsunami that nearly drowns the Morlocks. The X-Men arrive at the last second and save everyone. After the chaos, Storm finds Evan and asks him to come home, but he refuses, saying he's found his place and is now with friends. Storm watches him leave with his new family. In the end, Spear, revealing himself as a true villain, orders an increase in Power 8 production, implying that the drink's toxicity is actually a valuable feature. The scene cuts to Shadowcat driving with a terrified Xavier in the passenger seat. Mastermind is strolling through Italy, using his illusions to mess with people's heads. Magneto, the master of magnetism, appears and offers Mastermind a job, which he accepts on the spot. Meanwhile, in Bayville, Wanda is in a taxi when she sees a bridge on fire. She gets out and comes face to face with Pyro, laughing as he turns everything into a barbecue. The fight is on, but Pyro is a tough nut to crack. Wanda nearly ends up in the lake along with a car but manages to hang on. Just then, Jean, Scott, and Storm arrive to handle the damage control. Jean discovers that Magneto sent Wanda a message basically saying, "Forget me." This just makes Wanda even more pissed off than she already was. At the Brotherhood house, Pietro is acting like the new boss, making Blob, Toad, and Avalanche do all the work while he relaxes. The guys are fed up, but Pietro claims it's to show Magneto they're a team. The peace is shattered when Wanda arrives, and Pietro hides in a locker. Without a second thought, the guys give up his hiding spot. Wanda confronts her brother, and he admits their father only talks to him when he needs something. Toad, ever the simp, tries to hit on Wanda and, to impress her, comes up with a plan: steal Nightcrawler's image inducer. Speaking of whom, Kurt is at Amanda's house to meet her parents, but his device is glitching like a bad Wi-Fi signal. He teleports away to avoid revealing his blue form, but her parents nearly catch him in the act several times. During dinner, Toad shows up, steals the inducer, and reveals Kurt's true appearance to everyone. Amanda, breaking the awkward tension, asks, "Anyone for dessert?" Wanda continues her search for her father and follows Pyro to a ski resort. There, she meets an instructor named Eric, who is actually Toad in disguise. She doesn't fall for it, but ends up captured by one of Magneto's metal spheres. Inside, Mastermind begins rewriting her memories, turning Magneto into the father of the year. Toad sees everything and in desperation asks Kurt for help, promising to return the inducer. In the end, Wanda wakes up, kisses Eric, and the inducer fails, revealing Toad. She slaps him but thanks him for saving her. As for Kurt and Amanda, they're cool, proving that looks don't matter. At the Brotherhood house, Wanda is happy, living in a lie, and Pietro stops Toad from telling her the truth because this way she'll finally stick around. Rogue and Scott are playing squash, and she is absolutely dominating. She wins, helps him up, and suggests a rematch. Scott says he can't because he has a concert to go to with Jean. Rogue Rogue is visibly bummed, and as soon as he leaves, she has a flash of Jean receiving roses from Scott. Her head starts to ache. Meanwhile, a blind seer named Destiny warns Mystique that Rogue is in grave danger. Back in the Institute, Rogue, freaking out, hits the ball so hard it breaks through the wall. She has another flash, this time of Blob, and shatters her racket. The girl is not okay. The next day, Logan notices something is wrong and shows her the destroyed racket, but Kitty arrives and saves her from the interrogation, dragging her to Jean's new car. In the car, Kitty and Nightcrawler start teasing Jean about going on a date with Scott, which makes Rogue feel even worse. At school, Rogue runs into her long-lost friend Risty, who is actually Mystique in disguise. Rogue's powers continue to glitch. She phases through a door and then makes a water fountain explode. She confides in Risty, saying her head is getting a little crowded with so many personalities. The disguised Mystique invites her to the concert. At the concert, Rogue sees Scott and Jean together and feels down. Risty notices and sneers. They deserve each other. Rogue gets more and more agitated in the crowd until a girl falls on her, tearing her sleeve. All hell breaks loose. Her skin touches several people, and finally, Risty, who transforms back into Mystique. Rogue absorbs Mystique's memories and powers and has a complete breakdown. She transforms into Saber-tooth and attacks the stage, destroying everything. The X-Men try to intervene, but she's a force of nature. She transforms into Juggernaut, escapes, and then takes on Quicksilver's form to throw off the police. In an alley, Mystique finds her and drops the bombshell. She's her adoptive mother. Rogue, completely confused and feeling betrayed, transforms into Mystique herself and attacks her, then runs away. She uses Nightcrawler's power to get to a rooftop, but Wolverine finds her. She turns into Saber-tooth again and attacks him. The other X-Men arrive and the fight becomes insane. She turns into Cyclops and fires at Scott himself, then becomes Avalanche, then Storm, and starts using all their powers at once, bringing the X-Jet down and knocking Storm out. Wolverine, who can take the most punishment, asks Iceman to create a ramp to reach her. He manages to talk to her, appealing to her tough side. She calms down for a second, but the personalities take over again. Professor X arrives and helps her expel all the extra minds. She collapses into Logan's arms, who carries her away as Mystique watches from a distance, devastated. In the end, Destiny warns that an even more powerful mutant will soon emerge and decide the fate of everyone. Sometime later, Gambit decides to steal an ancient relic for a man named Mesmero, who has hypnotized him. Angel, the owner of the house, tries to stop him, but Mesmero uses his powers to knock him out. But the party doesn't last long. Magneto appears, traps Mesmero with iron bars, and accuses him of using one of his men to do the dirty work. Mesmero tries to use his powers on Magneto, but it's like trying to take down a wall with a slingshot. Magneto crushes him with the bars and forces him to release Gambit from the trance. He takes the relic and drags Mesmero with him, saying they'll find out if it was all worth it. Angel wakes up and goes straight to the Xavier Institute for help. At Magneto's base, Mastermind reads Mesmero's mind and discovers the plan. The relic is half of the Spider Stone, which, when complete, forms the key to freeing the most powerful mutant of all time, Apocalypse. Xavier understands the gravity of the situation and decides the X-Men must find the other half first. Iceman wants to go along, but the team thinks he isn't responsible enough. Meanwhile, Mesmero manages to escape from Magneto, who becomes furious and heads to London with his acolytes to stop the villain from getting the other half of the stone. At the Institute, Kurt brings food to Rogue, who is still recovering, and comforts her, saying that as siblings, he'll always be there for her. In London, the X-Men arrive, and Scott discovers a stowaway on the X-Jet, Iceman. The brawl begins at the museum, with the X-Men facing off against the Acolytes. In the middle of the chaos, Mesmero loses his part of the Spider Stone, which joins with the other piece and forms a giant mystical spider. The spider goes on a rampage, dragging Magneto along with it. Xavier's team wants to capture it for study, but Magneto just wants to destroy it. The battle is chaotic. Colossus, Saber-tooth, and Pyro try, but the spider defeats them all. Gambit, in a desperate act, throws a double-decker bus at it and blows it up. This only slows the creature down. Magneto, using all his power, finally manages to destroy the spider. Victory? Not a chance. Xavier reveals the terrible truth. This was exactly what Mesmero wanted. The spider wasn't the key, but the guardian of Apocalypse's prison. By destroying it, Magneto opened the second door, clearing the way for the villain's return. The world as they know it is about to change forever. Our our heroes are living it up on a luxury cruise in the Caribbean, complete with a pool party and all. But not everyone is in the mood. Amara is feeling seasick, and Aurora notices. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ship, Scott and Jean are about to have a romantic moment, but are interrupted by the giggles of Kurt and Kitty, who were spying on the couple. To make the lack of privacy even worse, they see ice sculptures floating in the sea. It could only be one person, Bobby, and it was. Iceman is on the ship's bow trying to impress Tabitha and Amara. He decides to do his own version of Titanic, screaming, "I'm the king of the world," but Scott arrives just in time, startling Bobby, who slips and nearly falls into the sea, left dangling. To complete the disaster, the ship is heading straight for the giant iceberg. The first mate panics, Jean saves Bobby with telekinesis, and Scott, in full responsible leader mode, blasts the iceberg with an optic blast, furious at his friend's recklessness. The next morning, the situation only gets worse. During breakfast, a passenger won't stop complaining about everything, and Tabitha, having lost her patience, decides to scare her with one of her cherry bombs. But the plan backfires and ends up causing a fire. Jean puts out the fire using water from a giant lobster tank, but this exposes her powers to everyone. In the confusion, Jamie accidentally multiplies, and Kurt's image inducer malfunctions. Just like that, their secret is out. From then on, the mood on the ship turns hostile, with everyone treating the mutants poorly. To escape, the group decides to go to the island of San Sebastian. Amara, who is growing weaker from being away from the Earth, is taken by Tabitha and Bobby in an ice canoe. On the island, the crew finds a hot spring. Amara dives in and finally feels better, but as she recharges near a fissure at the bottom of the spring, she accidentally activates the island's volcano. The city begins to rumble, and the X-Men spring into action to save the residents. For the first time, they are seen as heroes, complete with applause and photos. But the joy is short-lived. The volcano truly erupts, and Amara, feeling guilty, realizes only she can stop it. She walks to the crater and in an epic moment falls into the lava. Instead of dying, she emerges controlling the magma and calming the volcano. Storm and the others arrive and are left stunned. Despite being heroes on the island, they know that returning to the ship full of hostile people won't be easy. The night begins with a scene worthy of a spy movie. A mysterious figure infiltrates a shield base, finds Wolverine's file, and slashes the computer screens with adamantium claws. The intruder escapes, leaving behind a DNA sample that, to everyone's surprise, is a match for Logan's. Meanwhile, at the X-Mansion, Wolverine is putting the new recruits through one of his tough-as-nails training sessions, and they are not happy about it. The training is interrupted when SHIELD helicopters land on the lawn and take Logan away at gunpoint. At the base, Mick Fury confronts Logan and takes him to Dr. Rissman, a scientist who used to work for Hydra. She reveals the truth. The intruder is X-23, a female clone of Wolverine. Hydra tried to recreate the Weapon X program, and after 22 failures, the 23rd attempt was a success. They used Logan's DNA and created the perfect warrior, but they couldn't control her emotional instability and rage. She was raised without love or compassion, turned into a fighting machine since the age of 12. Meanwhile, X-23 infiltrates the X-Mansion. Seeing the friendship and affection among the students, she is reminded of her own brutal training. With terrifying efficiency, she begins to neutralize the X-Men one by one. When Logan finally returns, accompanied by Scott, Ray, and Rogue, they find most of the team unconscious. X-23 appears and, in a display of power, easily defeats the trio. The fight everyone has been waiting for finally happens. Logan versus X-23. He hesitates to hurt her, trying to talk, saying he understands her pain. The fight moves outside the mansion, and X-23 screams that all her suffering is his fault. Logan finally pops his claws, but only to defend himself, telling her that he was used too, and that deep down, he's the closest thing to a family she has. The revelation breaks her, and she collapses in tears. Just then, Fury arrives to take her in, but Logan stops him, saying she has suffered enough. The night at the mansion is strangely silent. A mysterious figure moves through the halls, enters Professor X's room, and leaves him unconscious. The same happens to Jean and Scott. Kitty wakes up to a noise, but before she can react, the figure surprises her. It's Rogue, who absorbs her powers and knocks her out. The next morning, no one remembers anything, but Rogue feels terrible, as if she had a nightmare. Later, she gets into a black limousine where Mystique is waiting for her. The plan is in motion. Rogue's mission is clear: to become a one-woman army. First, she invades the Brotherhood's house, and, using the powers she has already absorbed, defeats Wanda, Lance, Blob, and Toad in succession. possession. Quicksilver even tries to escape with his super speed, but Rogue pulls him back with telekinesis. The next targets are Magneto's acolytes. She breaks into a warehouse and takes down Colossus, Saber-tooth, and Pyro. Gambit tries to reason with her, but she attacks him without mercy and kisses him, absorbing his powers. The final move is against the Master of Magnetism himself. She disguises herself as Gambit, and when Magneto approaches, she touches him, absorbing his power as well. It's Scott and Jean's graduation day. The ceremony is interrupted by the dramatic arrival of Magneto, his acolytes, and the Brotherhood. Panic ensues, but Magneto reveals he isn't there to attack. He has come to warn them that Rogue, who now possesses unimaginable power, is being mentally controlled by Mesmero. At that moment, Rogue breaks free from the control and attacks everyone, then flees. An unlikely alliance is formed. Wolverine, Saber-tooth, and Gambit go in pursuit, while Xavier and Magneto team up to uncover Mesmero's plan. Using Cerebro, Xavier manages to read Mesmero's mind and discovers his goal: Apocalypse's tomb in Egypt. The X-Men, Brotherhood, and Acolytes fly there. Following instructions, Kitty phases through the floor beneath the Sphinx and finds a secret room, activating a lever that reveals a staircase. The team descends and enters the tomb. Torches light up, revealing sinister statues everywhere. Kitty, still spooked, warns Kurt that the place is creepy. Suddenly, the statues start to move. The door closes, and the torches go out. The team realizes too late they've walked right into a trap. As Pyro relights the torches, the fight kicks off. Cyclops tries to blast one of the statues, but it barely scratches it. The statue retaliates, knocking over a pillar that nearly crushes Kitty, but Colossus saves her at the last second. Soon after, the floor collapses, and Kitty, Colossus, and Nightcrawler fall through. Another section of the floor takes Scott, Quicksilver, and Pyro elsewhere. Beast faces a statue alone and nearly gets taken out. In the chaos, Xavier's wheelchair is knocked over, and the ground gives way beneath him, but Magneto manages to save him. Jean saves Bobby from a cave-in, but they come face to face with another statue. Storm attacks, but her powers don't work, and she has to dodge an attack that brings down another pillar. Elsewhere, Beast, Magneto, and Xavier are trapped in a room. They find hieroglyphs that Beast begins to translate. The wall tells the story of a pharaoh named Rama-Tut, who came from the stars with advanced technology, and of a gray-skinned mutant abandoned in the desert, who was saved by a tribe of thieves. The leader named him Ensaba-Nur, the first one. He became an invincible warrior, but the pharaoh, out of fear, sent his army to annihilate the tribe. Ensaba-Nur survived, swore revenge, and adopted the name Apocalypse. Meanwhile, Wolverine's team is in the Himalayas, tracking Mesmero, Mystique, and Rogue. Back in the tomb, Mystique discovers she's been deceived. She is the third key to freeing Apocalypse. She transforms into a snake, enters a hole, and touches a pillar. Mesmero lied, and Mystique is turned to stone. Rogue enters the room, descends the stairs, and touches the Eye of Ages. Inside, there is an ancient Ensaba-Nur, who begins to open his eyes. Cyclops' team discovers the statues are robots, and, with Jean's help, they manage to destroy several of them. They regroup and find Apocalypse's ship. Wolverine arrives at the cave, sees the petrified Mystique and unconscious Rogue, just in time to witness Apocalypse's resurgence. Young and powerful, the X-Men's ship reappears in the cave, and everyone comes out to fight. But it's no use. With a single energy pulse, Apocalypse throws everyone aside. He enters the ship and disappears. Magneto says, "We have failed," and Xavier adds, "Yes, our greatest battle has only just begun." Sometime later, in another part of Egypt, Magneto's acolytes are searching for answers. Magneto is furious and threatens Colossus, saying that if he doesn't find anything, he'll never see his family again. At the Xavier Institute, life goes on. The new mutants are playing a sort of mutant ball, but Rogue is in a major slump, sitting alone. Logan tries to talk to her, but she's cold and distant, especially when the subject of Mystique comes up. Speaking of Mystique, at the Brotherhood's house, her statue has become a plaything. Toad is dancing with it, and Blob wants to use it as a gargoyle on the roof. Nightcrawler, her son, is horrified to see this, teleports there, and steals the statue back to the Institute. Back in his room, Nightcrawler notices a tear rolling down the statue's eye. He rushes to show Xavier and Beast, but they say it's just condensation. Kurt gets annoyed, but soon Jean appears with news. They found Apocalypse. The X-Men head to Mexico and find find the pyramid protected by an impenetrable energy dome. They try everything, but nothing works. Suddenly, a metal sphere appears in the sky. It's Magneto. He attacks the dome with everything he has, but it doesn't even leave a scratch. Apocalypse ascends and seemingly disintegrates the master of magnetism in front of everyone. Meanwhile, a desperate Nightcrawler seeks help from Agatha Harkness. She says she can't do anything, but someone else can. That person is Rogue. Agatha explains that Rogue's powers are the only thing that can free Mystique. Rogue appears, surprised, but refuses to help. Kurt insists, saying it's the right thing to do. In a fit of anger and pain, she simply shoves the statue off the gazebo where they were standing. The statue falls and shatters into 1,000 pieces as Nightcrawler watches in horror. The Brotherhood is riding the subway, and tensions are high. Pietro rips up a newspaper with an anti-mutant headline to defend Wanda, but she, feeling guilty, loses control of her powers and the train derails. In the chaos, they end up saving several people. Lance saves an old lady, and even Toad helps a guy out. The result? The media turns them into heroes. The old lady Lance saved, who owns a giant construction company, shows up and gives them a load of cash. Seeing an opportunity, Pietro has a brilliant or terrible idea: stage more accidents to become permanent heroes. Meanwhile, at the Institute, the X-Men read the paper and can't believe their enemies have become the darlings of the city. Xavier notices a pattern in the accidents and sends his team to investigate. The Brotherhood's next plan is at the zoo, where they set a trap for the X-Men. Wanda uses her powers to mess with her rival's abilities. Cyclops' visor falls off, and he fires optic blasts everywhere. Kitty gets stuck in the glass of the crocodile enclosure, and Jean's telekinesis goes haywire. The result? The X-Men are arrested and the Brotherhood comes out looking like the good guys. High on their success, they plan one last grand heroic act. Pietro sabotages a train, but the plan goes very, very wrong. He didn't know there was another train on the same line carrying 8 tanker cars of gasoline. The prank has turned into a real crisis. With disaster imminent, the police release the X-Men from jail because there's no one else to clean up the mess. In the middle of the chaos, Kitty has a risky plan. Try to phase one train through the other. It doesn't quite work, and the trains collide and begin to explode. Jean tries to contain the blast with a force field, but it's too much power for her. But then, Lance shows up and saves the day, using his powers to make the ground swallow the flaming trains. Afterward, he admits the Brotherhood's hero phase is over. The X-Men are cleared and the Brotherhood comes under investigation. The media now sees them as villains, and the people who gave them the money come back to take it all, including the giant TV. To top it all off, Pietro suggests they take the subway, and the rest of the team turns on him. We start at a cafe with the younger students complaining about Jean and Scott's class. They'd much rather be taught by Logan, but Wolverine brushes them off, saying if Jean and Scott want to teach something, it's worth learning. Little does he know, his day is about to get a lot more complicated. Out of nowhere, tentacles shoot out of a wall and knock him out with a device. Game over, Logan. Meanwhile, in class, chaos reigns. Sam accidentally uses his powers and knocks Scott over, proving the lesson wasn't going to be as easy as Jean thought. Cut to Logan, who wakes up chained inside a Hydra plane. Like a true Wolverine, he breaks free and rips open the side of the plane, only to discover he's miles up in the air. Guards appear, open fire, and Logan is thrown out, falling wild, coyote style, into a snowy forest. Down below, he's hunted by Omega Red and Gauntlet, 2 Hydra goons. When all seems lost, a mini Wolverine, X-23, appears out of nowhere and takes down both villains with absurd ease. She and Logan start walking through the forest, and she explains she ran away from the Institute to protect everyone from Hydra and S.H.I.E.L.D. They find a tracker in Logan's boot and realize they're being led into a trap. They end up cornered in a cave and are captured. At the Hydra base, the big boss Viper reveals her plan to wipe X-23's mind and turn her into the perfect weapon. But X-23 had a backup plan. She let herself be captured all along. She wakes up before the procedure, finds Logan, and all hell breaks loose. X-23 goes after Viper in a getaway plane, while Logan deals with Omega Red, electrocuting the guy with his own tentacles. X-23 confronts Viper and blows up the plane, which crashes with no apparent survivors, or so it seems. In the end, Logan lies to Nick Fury, saying X-23 died so S.H.I.E.L.D. will stop hunting her, but he catches her scent and knows she survived, keeping the secret to himself. One night in Scotland, a teenager named Lucas uses telekinesis to visit a prisoner, David, and gives him a cell phone. David calls Professor Xavier and drops a bombshell. Father! Professor X is in shock, having never known he had a son. Xavier, Jean, Scott, and Storm fly to Scotland. On the way, the professor explains he had a whirlwind marriage with a woman named Gabrielle, but had to leave because of his work with mutants, never knowing she was pregnant. Meanwhile, at the Institute, Kitty and Nightcrawler are sick. Kitty is having nightmares about going to school in her pajamas, and Nightcrawler can't stop sneezing. During one of these sneezes, he teleports them both into the school, and Kitty's nightmare becomes a reality in the most comical way. At Xavier's ex-wife's house, the situation is tense. Gabrielle admits she lied to David, telling him his father abandoned him. Things get even weirder when Jean is kidnapped by Lucas, who reveals himself to be a telepath far stronger than she is. He takes her to a ruined castle and says that if she wants to save David, she'll have to stay there. The X-Men figure out where they are. Jean finds David and they escape together. When David finally meets Xavier, he shakes his father's hand and transforms into a little boy named Ian. We discover that David, Lucas, and Ian are the same person, a mutant with multiple personalities. Xavier enters his son's mind to try to help him control his other selves. He manages to trap Ian and Lucas in psychic bubbles, but while trying to save David, he accidentally frees Lucas. Back in the real world, David transforms into Lucas, who reveals his master plan. He orchestrated everything so that Xavier, the only telepath strong enough, would eliminate his other personalities. He wanted to be the sole consciousness in control. In the end, Xavier is devastated to have lost the son he barely knew, but Storm comforts him, saying that one day he will return. Anti-mutant tension is in the air. A young boy named Dorian watches the news about Apocalypse's mysterious domes, while his mutant-hating mother turns off the TV. On the street, Evan, Spike, has become a sort of Batman of the sewers, protecting the Morlocks, mutants who live in hiding. He saves one of them from a gang and argues with Callisto, their leader, saying they should fight back instead of hiding. Evan's patience with mutant haters finally runs out when he has to save Sam and Amara from Duncan, that same old anti-mutant guy. In the fight, Evan destroys Duncan's car, which only makes things worse. Xavier sends Logan to talk to Evan, but Wolverine basically sees his point and leaves him be. The situation escalates, angry mobs gather, and Duncan, now with a group of miners, decides to hunt the Morlocks in the sewers. Evan and the Morlocks prepare for a fight, and the X-Men arrive to help. In the middle of the chaos, Duncan tries to shoot Evan, but little Dorian, who ran away from home to see what was happening, gets in the way. In a cowardly act, Duncan aims at the boy. Evan, without a second thought, jumps in front and takes the bullet. Dorian's desperate cry unleashes a wave of energy that simply shuts down everyone's powers in the area. Powerless, Duncan's goons can't do anything and are arrested. Dorian's mother shows up and instead of thanking him, blames Evan for exposing her son as a mutant. As soon as Dorian leaves, everyone's powers return. Storm is proud of her nephew, who decides to continue as the protector of the Morlocks. In the end, Professor Xavier offers Dorian a place at the Institute, showing that there is always hope, even in the midst of chaos and prejudice. Rogue is in a major slump, having nightmares about the petrified Mystique and feeling incredibly guilty. Professor X tries to help, but she's so down she just wants to be left alone. On her way to school, she bumps into Nightcrawler, who's still upset with her. He asks if it's true she's leaving the team, and Rogue stays on the fence, neither confirming nor denying it. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Gambit appears and kidnaps her. He uses a sleeping gas from his staff, and when Rogue wakes up, she's tied up on a moving train. He claims he did it to help her de-stress, but she obviously doesn't buy it and tries to attack. Meanwhile, at the Institute, the team realizes Rogue is missing. Nightcrawler is extremely worried, and Logan, like the protective father figure he is, goes after her. He finds her backpacked and, from the scent, figures out it was Gambit. The search leads Wolverine to Pyro, who is laughing like a maniac while watching Magneto's supposed death on a loop. Logan beats him up, but Pyro doesn't know anything. On the train, Gambit offers to let Rogue read his mind to prove his innocence, but she refuses. The X-Men, using Cerebro, discover the two are in New Orleans, right in the middle of Mardi Gras. There, the vibe between them gets a little weird, until they get into a bar fight. Rogue absorbs some guy's power and has a vision of a man tied up. Now she gets it. Gambit used her. He needed her powers to rescue his father, who was kidnapped by a rival gang. Though furious, she decides to help. After a cinematic escape and a little help from the X-Men who arrive for the fight, Rogue decides to return to the Institute. As a souvenir, Gambit leaves her the Queen of Hearts card. The Institute crew goes dirt biking in a rocky area, and Logan gives a clear order, everyone in pairs. But Rogue decides to play the lone wolf and leaves Shadowcat behind. The result? Kitty has a nasty accident and is nearly a goner. But luckily, a mysterious girl named Danielle Moonstar appears and saves her. The kicker, Danielle is also a mutant. Back at the Institute, Xavier introduces Danielle as the new student. Her power is telepathy, but it's very unstable. During a training session, Danielle gets overwhelmed and her power goes haywire, causing everyone to hallucinate their worst fears. At night, things get worse. She gives everyone nightmares. Logan relives the Weaponettes program. Storm gets trapped by her claustrophobia, and Xavier dreams of Sentinels attacking the mansion. The next day, the plot twist. Danielle is gone, and the weirdest part, no one remembers her. Xavier, Scott, Jean, they all think Kitty has lost her mind and invented a friend after her accident. But Kitty doesn't give up and starts hearing Danielle's voice asking for help. She convinces Nightcrawler to take her to Danielle's hometown, Dark Hollow. There, they learn from the girl's grandfather that she disappeared 2 years ago. Kitty realizes everything is connected to the site of her accident. She dives into the water and phases through the ground, finding a secret cave. There lies Danielle, trapped in a kind of hibernation. With help from the rest of the team, who arrive for a dramatic rescue, they manage to save her. In the end, Xavier explains that Danielle survived in stasis and created a psychic link with Kitty to call for help. Basically, a friendship via telepathy. Apocalypse is back, and he's not messing around. He begins raising technological pyramids in Egypt, and his plan is sinister: to awaken the dormant X gene in a large portion of humanity, knowing many won't survive. Professor X, in his infinite wisdom, decides the best idea is to go have a chat with the villain alone, bringing only Storm as his pilot. The result: Apocalypse captures them both in front of everyone, making them vanish. The team is in shock. Jean is devastated, and who shows up to offer their 2 cents? Nick Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. He sends an army of Sentinels after Apocalypse, but the villain possesses one and destroys the rest as if they were nothing. Fury's real plan was just to damage Apocalypse's energy domes, and then comes the real gut punch. Apocalypse reveals his 4 horsemen, and they are none other than Magneto, Mystique, Storm, and Professor Xavier himself. They have all been transformed into the villain's superpowered servants. The shock is universal. With their friends and worst enemies now on the side of evil, the X-Men have no choice but to fight. Logan organizes the teams. Kitty manages to recruit Scarlet Witch, Nightcrawler calls on Spike, and Jean gathers other allies. They split into jets and head for the final confrontation, which looks like something out of an Avengers movie. Jean's team will face Xavier in Egypt, Storm's will take on Hank and his crew in China, and Kitty's team, with Wanda, will fight Magneto in Mexico. In Egypt, Jean tries a telepathic heart-to-heart with Professor X like, "Hey, wake up, you're being controlled," but gets a mental shove in return. The team then resorts to brute force with magma geysers and explosives. In China, Evan tries to talk to his Auntie Storm, but her response is a hailstorm. In Mexico, Wanda tries the same tactic on her father, Magneto, who responds by hurling a piece of a Sentinel at her. Lucky for her, Kitty Pryde is there to phase through it and save her friend. Meanwhile, Logan, Scott, and Kurt are hunting Mystique, whose powers are in overdrive. She turns into a puddle of water, grabs Nightcrawler, and then stretches her own body to dodge a blast from Cyclops, turning into Swiss cheese for a second. Things get so chaotic that Apocalypse notices the fight and accelerates his plan. The pyramids take off and head into space, splitting into smaller versions to surround the Earth. Jean looks up at this and declares, "We were too slow." The beatdown continues. Jean puts on Cerebro and engages in an epic psychic battle with Xavier. In Mexico, just as Magneto is about to crush Wanda, Pietro shows up at the speed of light and saves his sister, bringing the Brotherhood of Mutants as backup. Apocalypse finally activates his master plan to turn every human on the planet into a mutant. But just when all seems lost, Rogue emerges as an ace in the hole. Cannonball launches her straight at the main pyramid. With a clear path, Rogue shuts down Apocalypse's reactor, breaking the mind control over Xavier, Storm, and Magneto. She confronts the villain, absorbs his powers, and seals him back in his tomb. Wolverine helps close the sarcophagus and rescues Nightcrawler just before the entire pyramid blinks out of existence. In the end, the teams reunite. Mystique tries to apologize, but Nightcrawler and Rogue simply turn their backs on her. Magneto is reunited with his children. Back at the mansion, Professor X thanks everyone and reveals that while he was under Apocalypse's control, he saw the future. A future full of conflict, with heroes turning into villains and villains seeking redemption. He says that despite everything, he is proud of each of them for saving the world.
And of that, I am proud.